You got a cake, Rudy?
Okay, welcome to our class on positivity bias. We're at chapter 19, and I want to start off with a story. One of the things that we've talked about I had the beautiful opportunity of serving as the chaplain for the cadet officer school at Maxwell Air Force Base for Civil Air Patrol these days. And one of the things we talk about in leadership is always the concept of servant leadership, of the responsibility of leadership is to be there for others. And we'll talk more about that. It's a big topic in a lot of different ways, but I want to share a personal experience that was very impactful for me personally. This goes back into the 1980s when I was teaching. I was teaching first grade at the Hebrew Academy in Long Beach, California, and I was also doing the youth program, the outreach program, the youth activities. And I was taking the older boys and girls on trips to skiing or whitewater rafting or rock climbing or whatever it was, right? The youngest group I ever took rock climbing was fourth grade class. I'd had them for first grade, but now, a few years later, they're now in fourth grade. But two of the boys that were there
just walked in the door.
fantastic. Two of the boys, at some point, one of them ended up with childhood diabetes.
Oh, nasty.
Very serious. And since I was the EMT on campus, whenever he felt off a little bit, his instructions were to go visit me. Children's Hospital had been out to visit me and give me instructions on how to support him. And so this is part of their responsibilities. But it was really frightening for, a 9-year-old to have a potentially life-threatening illness and have to manage his blood sugars. Thank God nowadays there's been a tremendous amount of advances over the years, but this was back in the 80s. And it still meant doing blood tests and either work out a little bit to burn up some sugar or drink some orange juice to bring in some more sugar. But it was a lot of hit and miss refining and scary.
Thank you, Kat.
So I took the opportunity to take the fourth grade class and take them rock climbing. So I took one of the school buses, loaded up the bus with the class, as well as a couple of the dads to help manage the activities. And we went out to Riverside, Mount Rubidoux, and there was a nice 30-foot solid climb, not vertical, but sure felt like it. And I set up the top ropes. We set up the kids at the bottom, and they took turns. And each kid would take a turn putting on a harness and roping up, and I would belay the kids one by one up this rock. And even though you're safe because you're on a top rope belay, and really all you could do is get some scratches and scuffs, but it's emotionally it's terrifying because you really feel you're climbing 30 feet near vertical, holding on to the rocks. It's scary. It's very scary. And the whole point of experiential education was about creating an artificial environment with very real emotions. And that's the catalyst for growth. So the idea was to set up an environment that was safe, but it feels very challenging. And rock climbing is a really good example of that. So it was Chaim's turn. Now Chaim and his nearly identical twin brother. So Chaim was the one who had the diabetes, and got him up to the rock, and he started climbing. And most of the kids, I kept them just a little bit past their comfort zone. If they wanted down, I let them climb down, push them a little bit harder, but pretty much, let them own it, right? But I pushed him a little bit further. I pushed Chaim to really take this on. You can do this. You can do this. I encouraged him. And he made it. It took a while, but he finally made it to the top of this 30-foot near vertical climb. And he rappelled down. And when I went to take off his carabiner, he looked at me, this 9-year-old kid looked at me and he said, "I need to do that again." Those were his words. "I need to do that again." I said, "Go ahead." And this time he went right up and he came right down. And he walked away. And from that day on, I could tell the twins apart from all the way across the building, because Chaim held himself higher. He had a self-confidence that wasn't there before. He'd faced his biggest fears and controlled them. And I didn't know if he knew what happened that day. But more than a decade later, I was at a wedding in Los Angeles, and it was a community wedding in Los Angeles, and Chaim, I saw him and his brother, now college students, walking down the hall towards the event. And I saw them, they saw me, we recognized, they came and gave me a big hug. And Chaim said, "Do you remember the day you changed my life?" And that moment, I realized he knew what happened. But the error was, I didn't really do anything. I provided an opportunity, supported him to do it, but he's the one who made the climb. He's the one who faced his fears. He's the one at 9 years old who turned around and said, "I need to do that again." And I think that's a huge piece of our responsibilities in leadership, is to empower our people to be able to succeed and to own their success. And here's the biggest piece of it: to own their success. 2 years later, I had a group. I was actually working with a grant from Outward Bound, and we had a group of our students. We went out to Joshua Tree National Park, which is east of
Vegas.
Palm Springs,
Oh, Palm Springs, right.
out in California. It's beautiful territory. And we were doing some bouldering. Now, bouldering is basically when you don't need a rope, you can climb with your, basically you can climb with your hands and your feet, and you can be pretty safe. You don't need to be roped up on a top rope climb. It's not, vertical or something. But we had reached a place where there was a rock here and there was a rock here. And in fact, over here, you even had a wall to be able to connect with. And yes, it was a 20-foot drop, but I could have stretched my feet across this gap. It wasn't that big a gap. I could have stretched my feet across the gap and had both feet on the sides, right? But what we did is I put my hand into the cliff on this side. There's a specific, in rock climbing, there's a specific type of an anchor where you put your hand in sideways and then you turn it and make a fist, and now it's wider and it won't come out of the rock. So you basically put your hand in and you have an anchor here. So I anchored to this side and I kind of leaned out over the edge there, so that as each of the boys jumped that scary jump, they made it to the other side, but I was there to back them up if necessary. And I didn't need to. Everybody did just fine. But precaution, I took the extra precaution to do that. There was this one kid, his name is David, right? It was his turn and he was mortified. And my thought process at the time was, if I push him through this and he makes it, then I partially own his success, because he only did it because I pushed him through. The goal is to have them own their own success, to truly own it. So we gave him the full space to either do it or not. and we gave them a time frame. We'll give you, 7 minutes to make a decision and take an action. And if you don't at that point, we'll just call it. But it's totally up to you, and we're fine whichever way. You can walk down and come back up to the other side and join us on the rock. Not a problem. And at the end, he didn't do it. He decided not to do it. But everyone was respectful of that because everyone had been terrified when doing it. So it's like, okay, got it, everyone could relate. But one of the parts of responsibility is allowing people to own their successes and to own their decisions. Bob, you were going to say
How old were
something.
these kids?
Pardon?
How old were those kids?
13.
And 13-year-olds were respectful? Nobody made fun?
So that was about creating the environment of trust and responsibility for the trust. And we work a lot of that when we're doing trust falls, and part of the experiential education activities is to build the camaraderie within a group that I'm going to trust you, but if you fail that trust, don't ask me to trust you again.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'd worked hard and long with that group, and no one, not a peep, and they all slapped him on the shoulder when he joined them, and right back in.
Rabbi, I'm a graduate of Outward Bound. As a flatlander near the Dutch border, I was sent as a reward, mind you, which seemed as a punishment at the time, into the Austrian Alps. I'd never seen a mountain before in my life. It was exhilarating. It was scary. We did some serious rock climbing, and what you just described as a chimney. And then years later, when I got drafted into the United States Army, you know what? Basic training was a piece of cake compared to Outward Bound. A piece of cake.
Do you know the history of Outward Bound, where it came from?
Yeah.
Kurt Hahn, a Jewish guy, was the Chancellor of Education in the Weimar Republic. And when the Nazis came to power, he made it clear you can't be a part of that party and a part of our school because the ethos are opposite. And Kurt ended up in Nazi jail. Because it was still early, they were able to get him out of there and bring him to England. And there he was part of the training for what would become Outward Bound, had previously been military training. And it became Outward Bound, and it grew international. So I was excited this week because my wife and I took the kids, the grandkids here in Baltimore, to a local park. And as I pull into the park, I see a sign, Outward Bound.
There you go.
One of the 5 U.S. Outward Bound schools in the country is right here. So I was really excited, and they had an open wall climbing session going on. 6 of their staff members were welcoming anybody who wanted to climb to do a wall climb there, and took up some of the grandkids, and it was marvelous.
When did they put mountains into Baltimore?
Wall climbs.
Okay.
You build up climbs.
Yeah, I get it. I'm being sarcastic.
So did you do it?
Did I?
Yeah.
No, I'm at an age, weight, and inflexibility that I don't need to do that anymore.
Just look at it that way, you probably would have bounced.
But I will tell you this, I pulled up on my phone some of the pictures of my 1987 Outward Bound trip to Joshua Tree with my students. And they were all excited. The young instructors were all excited, and they did a cheering song to welcome back an alumni. So it was Outward Bound was very, very special. Yes.
Oh yeah.
And that's part of the leadership training. Going back to Outward Bound was helping people own their decisions and own their successes. And that was a very big, important part of that. And I think that's what I want to talk about in this conversation here, because this is a huge part of this chapter. So in chapter 19, one of the first stories that comes right up is that a traditional Jew found himself in a relationship that is discouraged by Torah, and he visited the Rebbe, and he was torn that the conflict between his personal physical passions and his Torah beliefs and he was coming to the Rebbe, and he fell silent, and he kind of braced himself for a really strong rebuke. And the Rebbe's response after a minute was, "I envy you." What? I mean, that's like totally counterintuitive. Like, what do you mean what do you mean you envy me? Like, I have a major moral struggle, and you have envy? Like, where is that coming from? The Rebbe explained, God cares about us, God loves us, God only wants what's good for us. God knows what we're truly capable of in areas that we don't realize that we can do, which goes back to, well, we'll come back later. But when you're faced by the challenges of life, every rung on that ladder, the higher the ladder, the greater the challenge, but also the greater the accomplishment. And God doesn't give us a challenge we can't accomplish. Sometimes I think he thinks too highly of us.
Yeah, yeah.
But he believes in us. And he knows that we can do this. And furthermore, he's empowered us to do that. So when we face really hard, tough challenges, we may, complain and gripe and how can you do this and things like that. But on the flip side, God believes in us, and he believes we're capable of accomplishing this major task. And therefore, he gives us not, it says when we talk about Abraham and the test of the binding of Isaac, to take his son up and bind him on the altar, right? It's called the test of Abraham. It's not called the test of Isaac. Yeah. Why is it called the test of Abraham? Isaac knew what was going on. He was over 30. He knew what was happening here, right? But it was called a test for Abraham because Abraham was ish chesed. He was a man of absolute kindness. Yitzchak was a man of gevura, of severity. Yitzchak's personality was the kind when the commander says, "Hey, I need a volunteer for a suicide mission," Yitzchak would say, "Okay, if that's what we need, I'll do that." That was his personality. So it wasn't a test for him. For Avram, it was a huge test for multiple reasons, and that's a whole nother class. But God knows he could do it. Why is it called a test for Avram? Because Avram doesn't know what he's capable of. Mm-hmm. God presents us all of these very, very serious, tough challenges to elevate us, to bring us up. The Hebrew word for nisayon means a test, a challenge. Nisayon is a test. The root of the word is lanasais, to lift up, to enable us to do something we never thought we could do, and help us realize what we're capable of. And by the way, the real root of the word is nes, a miracle. It's not so much a miracle as much as God giving us the opportunity to own what we can achieve and achieve more than we thought we ever could. And so we sometimes think of this in the areas of physical challenges, right? Or in the case of Abraham, the idea of challenging a person to go way out of his comfort zone, right? But here the Rebbe is taking a situation where a person has a tremendous moral struggle. Most of us, when we think of someone who's struggling morally, we don't think highly of that person. They end up in jail or something. Mm-hmm. If we know what they, where they failed. But in reality, the Rebbe is showing that those are people, the people that have these huge moral challenges are capable of so much more than the rest of us. And that's why God gives them those huge moral challenges. So in the same vein, there was another story here of
See, you think that Abraham met the challenge, but I mean, there's another point of view that he failed, that he should have refused to sacrifice his own son. And because he did refuse, he had his son left him forever, and his wife left him. So, you know, for me, it's not very comforting that he was willing to sacrifice his own son.
The Talmudic resources on this, the traditional Jewish review of this story is, and you can even see it within the verbiage of the original text, right? Is that it was never God's intention that he would sacrifice his son.
But he didn't know that.
It was only set up as a test, right? He did not know that, right? But when we look deeper into the personalities and the details of it, yeah, traditional Jewish literature has always shared that this was the 10th challenge to go beyond human intellect, to go beyond what we think is right. One of the biggest challenges we have in the world today is people think they're being kind, but in being so kind, they're actually being cruel.
Yeah.
And there's so many examples of that in the world today. You know, people who are thinking they're being kind, but the end result will actually end up being cruel. And that's warned about in the Talmud. And so we have to be able to see past those things and see what, you know, what the really challenges are. And here, the challenge is all about, are you only using human intellect to decide what's right and wrong? Or are you going to follow the Torah's mandate? And the Torah's mandate was to see if he would actually do what God said, stop him before he did it, but to see if he was willing to go out of his own judgment call of what's right and wrong to follow the Torah's directive, to follow God's directive. And it's a big challenge.
What do you do if what you decide or what you are told is ethical, you find to be immoral?
So it's a really good question. It's a really, really good question. And there was a sample question one of my grandsons asked me on a much simpler level this morning in carpool, which was, he was asking a question: if you have a simcha, a celebration to go to between a family member and a best friend, where do you go? All right, well, my allegiance is to my family first. Well, what if it's two of your friends? How do you choose which wedding you go to or something like that, and or where your allegiance needs to be? And I explained to him that we have a concept called aseh l'charav, mentor. Yeah, I have an idea of having a mentor to talk with, right? Because our internal battle of good and evil is oftentimes subject to our personal desires or our personal problems. But the Pirkei Avos, the ethics of our fathers, says that aseh l'charav means you should choose for yourself a mentor, someone to ask these challenges to. When you're not sure if your judgment is on target or not, speak to a mentor. A mentor has to be someone, doesn't have to be older than you, but someone who knows the terrain and knows you and can have that conversation. And what happens is when you have that conversation, the two of you, so internally, I've always got this war going on between my godly soul and my animal soul, my desire to do what feels good and I want to do versus what's right or what's moral or what's the ethical thing to do. And there's always a struggle between the two. And sometimes it's clear, I just have to do the right thing. But there's sometimes when you're not sure which is the right way to go. And that's when you engage your mentor to say, hey, here's the conflict I'm having. Here's where my thought processes are going. Help me think through this clearly. And what the Talmud is teaching us is that we each have, I like to make it really simple, the angel on the shoulder and the devil on the shoulder, and they're both trying to get you to go one way, right? The thing is that when I speak with my mentor, it's 2 Yetzer Tovs, 2 angels against 1 devil. Now you ask the question, well, wait a minute. He's also got his own negative, right? His own evil inclination, right? The good ones will work together. The negative ones don't care about each other and won't work together. So when you actually work with somebody who knows you and cares, but has a little bit of distance, then they can help you think through that process to know what is the right and moral decision to be making there. But again, we don't do it alone. We always seek advice and seek from insights, and ultimately the decision is ours. But at the same time, have good advisors, have mentors, have people that think very differently from you to seek their insights. Don't make those decisions alone. We don't make those decisions alone. But also, interestingly enough, the Torah has a tremendous depth of guidance for almost all of life's problems. Do we listen?
Sometimes.
But it's here, and the wisdom is there. And on a medical side of things, and I think Ron and I, we've talked about this before on the medical side. What if you've got a procedure that's been suggested, and you have one person who's telling you you should do the procedure, and another person is telling you you should not do the procedure, and they're both experts in the field. Now what do? Right? And the Rebbe's advice was to speak to a friend in the industry. In other words, it doesn't have to be the expert, but he has to be someone who's close to you, because he has your interest in mind only. And he knows enough about the industry, whether it's finance or medicine or whatever. He knows enough about the industry to have an insight, but he's your friend, and that makes a difference as well. And the Rebbe's point was that God's blessings will be in that decision of what's best for you. But never to go it alone. Always seek advice and seek insights from the Torah as to what's the right way to go. So there was a guy who came, and he had made he was about to enter into a very big business adventure, which was a very big financial jump. And he committed that a certain percentage of whatever the income from this adventure would go, it would go to a charitable cause, to Torah schools. And he took a bad hit. He took a really bad hit. So he called to the Rebbe to complain. I made this deal with God, and God dumped me on that. And the Rebbe sympathized, because you always start with sympathy. And we're human, and it hurts. We start with sympathy, right? But then he compared the guy to Avraham Avinu, our forefather, the first Jew. And he said, I see the similarity between you and Avram. Avram was living with his family in Ur Kasdim, and God said, Lech lecha ma'aretzecha ma'moladetecha b'beis avicha, leave from your home, your birthplace, your father's land. Leave from here and go to the land I'm going to show you. I'm going to make you exceedingly wealthy. Avram packs everything up. He heads out on the journey. He gets to the land of Israel, the promised land, fruit, of flowing of fruit and honey, and flowing with what is it, date honey and goat milk and honey, land of milk and honey. And what happens? It's a famine. As soon as he gets there, there's a famine. Avram doesn't complain. He goes down to Egypt for a short time. where there isn't a famine, has all kinds of challenges there, but he never complained. When he came out of Egypt, he came out of Egypt with wealth, gold, silver, jewels, came out tremendously wealthy. So the promise got fulfilled, but not the way he thought it was gonna. And there was a challenge along the way. And so the Rebbe is explaining to this guy, you're like Avram. You're like Avram. God is testing your betachon, your trust. He's testing your faith that he promised you one thing, and then it doesn't look like it's going that way. Are you going to bellyache and complain and cry uncle? Or are you going to trust? Avram didn't complain, and he received the blessings. So for the Rebbe to tell this guy, sympathy, but then compare him to Avram and say your test is similar to Avram. I mean, the guy had to feel like you're comparing me to the founding father of the entire Jewish people. That I'm having a test like Avram's test. Wow, that lifted him up in a tremendous way. But the Rebbe sees it as clear. God doesn't give you a challenge you can't overcome. He wouldn't have given you this if it's not something you could overcome. And if we really believe that God only wants the best for us, then no matter what it is that we face, if we have that betachon, that trust, then it really is. It's exactly what we need. So again, it's coming to this idea of trusting in God, that whatever we're going to receive, we can achieve it and we can overcome it. And even in those areas like moral challenges, then knowing that this is for our best interests, and that not only can we do it, you will be amazed when you achieve it. But why do I have to go through this? Well, it goes back to the first story we were talking about at the beginning of the class. If I give you all the successes, then it's poor man's. It's bread of shame. It's a poor man's bread. It's you didn't earn it. You didn't really earn it. It's when do we feel truly accomplished? We feel truly accomplished when we've overcome a really serious challenge, and we did it, and we own it. And because we own it, that's when we feel that we've actually achieved. So the Rebbe is suggesting that in all of these areas, especially the ones of moral conflict, to number one, realize that God doesn't give us a conflict we can't overcome. And number two, to realize that the challenge is given to us as a gift, because in overcoming it, that's when we truly feel that we've accomplished. And owning that success makes us feel a tremendous sense of accomplishment. And now the Gary's on, I'll share one more story.
Thank you. My class just finished, so I thought I'd jump on. I hope I don't interrupt you.
Absolutely. No, there's one last story I was going to share. This conversation has all been about moral struggles. It's one thing when we have challenges and we overcome them and we feel good. And we thought we couldn't do. But we all have a Yetzer Hara, we all have an evil inclination. And when we fail in a moral struggle, then we feel doubly cursed. Why do I have to have this moral struggle? Why do I have to have this challenge? And what the Rebbe is bringing out, and there was a group of Aleph Institute has a military channel, but also has a prison channel. The Rebbe talked about the importance of Aleph Institute in a sense that those who are in prison and those who signed away in the military, they don't have the same rights as everyone else, because the prisoners lost their right, they forfeited it, And the military, you signed it away. When you took that oath of allegiance to the service, mission comes first.
Yep.
And so how much more so chaplains have to be able to step in and advocate for religious services and religious rights to these two groups. And that's what Aleph Institute does. So there was a group from Aleph Institute that was actually visiting the Rebbe in Crown Heights for a weekend. They had all been on, Gary, what is it called when a prisoner gets a time off? It's not called furlough.
Yeah, it is called furlough.
It is called furlough.
Yeah,
Okay.
they still call it that. Post-release control, that they have different terms for it, but yeah, that's basically it.
So they got a furlough to go to spend the weekend in Crown Heights and participate in a Farbrengen with the Rebbe. One of the things that Rebbe talked about was someone who has a serious challenge in moral areas and has lost that battle. And they have the one thing that makes us human is taken away, their freedom. They forfeited their freedom because of their decision. And so that's the one feeling that human choice is the one area that makes us different from everything else in creation. And that's been taken away. They no longer have choices about their day. And that could bring a person to the depths of depression, the lowest of low. Not only the failure that you failed and look what happened, but also that now you've lost and you're in a dark, dark place. As the Rebbe said, not to take away the moral failure, but nothing happens without God's being participant in it. So that person failed morally and ended up in prison in a place where they don't even have the basic of human rights. That could be really, really depressing. And yet the Rebbe says that person has the capacity to bring light to the darkest of places. God would not allow them to be in that circumstance if he didn't also give them the power to overcome the circumstance and bring light to even that dark, dark place. So these people that are on furlough, they're visiting the Rebbe by the Farbrengen. Interestingly enough, there was a tremendous sensitivity to the situation that they had all come together. I mean, you can think of a Farbrengen in 770. You have a bunch of black hat, white shirt, black coat, bearded Hasidim, thousands in the Rebbe's shul. You bring in 30 people that are not dressed and don't look this way, they're going to stand out. You sit them all together, people are going to ask about who's that group. And it's going to come out. So the Rebbe told their hosts, make sure they spread out all over and don't sit together. It'll make them more comfortable and it will reduce questions about who they are. Make them more comfortable. And so I think this piece of empowering the person that's in that dark, dark place to know you are actually there by divine mission, even though you made wrong decisions, but that's part of divine mission, that you're there because you have the power and the capacity to bring light to such a dark place. Gary, could you share what you did on the chat? Could you share that verbally? Because a lot of people will only be listening to the class.
Yeah, it's I mean, I get reminded of this often by the men at the prison, but they actually do this. I catch them doing this. They pray for people on the outside, the church, the synagogue, the mosque. They pray for people of faith outside the prison, and they do it all the time. It just amazes me that in the situation that they're in, they aren't looking. These men have gotten outside of themselves by their own faith and thought we need to be thinking about others. even in prison. That just amazes me.
Right. And that's exactly what we're talking about, is that people, it's amazing that person is going through such challenging times and such dilemmas, and yet they spend time thinking about people that have it tougher than they. It's amazing, but that's what the Rebbe is bringing out, is that when we overcome our situations, we overcome ourselves. When we actually become in service of others, that's when we reach our greatest achievements. And that's when we feel the greatest about our achievements, because we have overcome self. And the darker the pit, it's interesting. There's a book called The Hiding Place. And what was the name, Gary?
Corrie ten Boom. She's the
Corrie
author.
ten Boom.
Mhm.
Corrie ten Boom is the author. A Dutch family who hid Jews during Nazi occupation was caught. Her mother, her father, and her sister both died in the camps.
Yeah, her sister was abused terribly before she died.
Yeah, and Corrie survived. And what Corrie writes about, and the quote that in this movie, there was a movie that came out in the 70s about her story. And the quote that comes to my mind is, "There's no pit where God is not deeper still." But the idea to be able to bring light into the darkest of environments, that is a major accomplishment. And so we have to be able to see, even in the moral dilemmas, not just the physical challenges, but even the moral dilemmas, the people that are most challenged, if we realize that God has given them the ability to overcome this, then certainly they have a greater capacity than the average person.
Corrie
So
had
it's true.
Corrie had the opportunity to face forgive the woman who had her sister killed.
Yeah, that's wow. That's wow. So this concept that Rebbe is saying, that it turns out that people in jail are not the dregs of society, rather they have the potential to be the most far-reaching members. So we have to be able to see past the short-term story and see the bigger picture, that every nisayon, every test is lanasais, to lift us up, and can come out as a nace, as a miraculous, not miraculous in the sense that God changed the laws of nature, but that miraculous is that we achieved something so far beyond what anyone imagines. And as it is true in all areas of life, we have to be able to realize that even in the moral challenges, someone who's faced with a tremendous moral challenge, we have to help them understand that you actually have tremendous capacity, tremendous abilities, because God wouldn't give you the challenge if He didn't give you the capacity to overcome it. So very, very, very powerful lesson. Any thoughts to close off the class on this topic before we go to the Farbrengen?
One thing that you said that we're supposed to do, we haven't done. Judy has appeared.
Oh, well, that's after this.
Oh, after. I thought it was part of it.